that is that we have this image left over from biomechanics in days gone by about the spine as a compression column, that the head is on C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to the pelvis. And so the way our spine is stacked, right? This is the verbiage that we hear, stack your spine, or your spine is like a stack of bricks, right? And so all that weight is going down to the pelvis. The weight of all that on the pelvis is going down the weight, the legs, onto the teeny tiny little foot bones that could never support all the weight of the rest of the bones. Like, why would Mother Nature give us these teeny tiny little bones to stand on and big heavy bone in the middle, big heavy bone on top? Doesn't make sense. And that's true of many animals, four-legged animals too, right? The heavy stuff's up top. Like, that makes no sense, because we are not compression columns. If we were compression columns, we wouldn't be able to move much. We'd have to maintain our relationship to gravity. Numbers, 90 degrees, right? We'd have to maintain 90 degrees to gravity for us to be successful as a compression column. If we went like this, our head would want to fall off. Everything would go off balance. But it doesn't happen that way. It just so happens we could stand on our hands. We can be in any orientation because we're more like this. We're more like a tensegrity that maintains its shape despite gravity. Right? It maintains its structure through the tensioning. And this brings me to that comment that you wrote on the jaw video flick about, the tensegrity icosahedron can kind of unpack some of that answer, because we've got this continual tension that keeps it in its shape and makes it heavily responsive throughout the whole thing. And so if we think of this like muscles and bones, which is not the way the leaders of the field would prefer for us to think of the icosahedron, because it's an easy metaphor. They want us to think of this as a model of the invisible forces. But the invisible forces are on all scale levels, and one of the scale levels is bones and muscle and fascia. So if we think of this as bones being the chopsticks, the compression elements, and the strings, the yarn that's completely continuous through the whole thing, completely interconnected as muscles and fascia, what we see here is that there's space between the bones, just like there's space between the bones, and that the tensional network that's keeping the bones in the relationship is what's keeping the bones in the relationship. It's the tensional network that's keeping the bones in their spatial relationship, so that our arm doesn't suddenly float around to the middle of our back, or our leg doesn't go into our chest. The tensioning of the fabric, the tensioning of the tissues, the tensioning of the fascia keeps our bones held in place, while still allowing them to move relative to one another, because fascia provides differential movement. It lets things move around, but keeps them in their home. So this is a really good model for those invisible forces, and for a new idea that the spine is not a compression column. It isn't weight going down from the head down through all the vertebrae to the pelvis to the floor, that there's actually space that is between all of our bones. And Stephen Levin, who is the father of biotensegrity, says all the bones are sesamoid bones. Sesamoid bone is a floating bone, like the hyoid. We've got sesamoid bones in the feet too, that are floating. But because no bones are truly attached to one another, if the definition of sesamoid bone is that they're not attached, we are only sesamoid bones. And it's our fascia that holds us together. It's a really fascinating to think about eliminating the idea of hinges and pulleys and levers. How do the bones stay together? They're tensioned there. They're tensioned into place. Very interesting. So when we're pushing down into the chair, whether it's internal force, external force, the balance of, there is spaciousness emerging through our skeleton. We are creating more spaciousness between our bones using what's called ground reaction forces.